Hello, again, my name is Whitney Cravens, and today I will be discussing the Black Male's Mental Health Needs and Assets Assessment conducted by myself and mentored by Dr. Rhonda Lewis. Previous research has identified that Black males are at an increased risk for experiencing mental distress and associated complications in life compared to their white counterparts. For example, Black males are more likely to experience depression according to the National Institutes of Health. This may in part be due to Black males also being more likely to experience trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which research has correlated to possible mental distress or mental illness later in life. Examples of trauma or adverse childhood experiences could include physical or mental abuse, the death of a parent or loved one, or experiencing a natural disaster, but could even include more overlooked examples such as experiencing prolonged impoverished conditions or living with an individual diagnosed with a mental illness. Research has also identified that the Black community in general may be impacted by a historical and intergenerational trauma. This is due to historical events such as slavery and the continuous racial discrimination taking place in the United States. Lastly, Black males are significantly underrepresented in research focusing on mental health, which further increases their risk for unmet and underserved mental health needs. The purpose of this pilot study was to identify possible patterns in pre-existing sources of social support, common coping mechanisms, and perceptions on mental health and treatment options within the Black male community. In doing so, we hope to identify additional ways in which the community could serve and meet Black males' mental health needs. To do this, we administered a survey of 67 questions, which included a collection of questions from 5 standardized surveys, along with 7 open-ended questions. To analyze the data collected, we calculated frequencies for most multiple choice questions and conducted thematic analysis for the short answer questions. Lastly, for the perceived stress scale questions, we conducted standardized analysis. To participate in this study, you had to identify both as either Black or African American and as a male. To target this population, we conducted convenience sampling through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the Black Student Union. We had a total of 6 Black males participate in this study. From the study, we found that all of our participants had experienced at least one traumatic event or adverse childhood experience, and majority had experienced at least 3. Yet none of our participants described suicidal thoughts or tendencies within the last year. This supports previous research which suggests although Black males are more likely to experience adverse childhood experiences or trauma within their life, they are less likely to display this through externalized symptoms. However, majority of our participants admitted to dealing with stress or emotional issues throughout their life, which suggests trauma and adverse childhood experiences may have an impact on their mental health. Also, all of our participants described feeling comfortable communicating their emotions to others and described having the social support of at least 1 to 2 people to talk to. On the perceived stress scale, majority of our participants scored a moderate perceived stress scale. Research has correlated perceived stress scales to an overall health concern. Applying this correlation to the perceived stress scales of the participants, we found that 50% of our participants had either a high or very high health concern. The short answer section of the survey gave participants an opportunity to communicate their perceptions on pre-existing sources of social support, as well as mental health and available treatment options. All of our participants described being most comfortable communicating emotional issues or stress to friends if needed, but a considerable amount also mentioned family. Also, outside of the home, majority of the participants described feeling safest at school. This suggests that school friends and family may serve as existing sources of social support for the Black male community. Our study found and supported previous research findings that suggested although Black males were more likely to experience trauma or adverse childhood experiences, they were less likely to externalize symptoms. We also identified that school friends and family served as existing sources of social support. Considering these 2 findings together, it may be implied that these existing sources of social support provide quality buffers against externalized symptoms. However, due to majority of our participants also still describing struggling with stress and having moderate perceived stress scores, it's possible that this trauma and adverse childhood experiences has a deeper internal effect. Also, due to only one of our participants being to therapy within their lifetime and describing disliking the whole experience, it may be that traditional therapy is not reaching this population, and when it does, it's not as effective as it is for the white population. However, much more research is needed to confirm that claim, and there are additional steps that traditional therapy could take to enhance their treatment options for the Black male population. Overall, this study suggested that efforts aimed at the friends, family, and school may be an ideal way to reach the Black male population and serve their mental health needs. Limitations for the study included possible participation bias due to participants possibly responding in a socially desirable manner. Also, the small sample size of the study may be seen as a limitation, but it did serve the purpose of this pilot study. It identified possible patterns that can be replicated and looked for in a larger community sample. To address this limitation, I plan to replicate the study to find such patterns in a larger community sample next year. These are my references. Are there any questions?
Whitney, great job. I know you were nervous, but great job. So what did you find most interesting from the results because mental health I know was one of your biggest issues with the African-American males. What did you find most interesting about the results?
One of the things that I found most interesting was that they described feeling safest at school outside of the home. I was expecting not that, I guess. I don't really know what I was expecting exactly, but I wasn't expecting school just because previous research hasn't really hinted at that being a existing source of social support. But something that's also important to consider is that these were all students, considering that I had to do convenience sampling through Black Student Union and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, so that could have obviously contributed to that a lot.
Counseling in mental health is not something that is high on the list for African Americans. And with that being the case, did you get any feeling about the need for counseling or the desire for counseling based on your research?
So my research is influenced by that. I've noticed that although it seems that mental health problems seem to be impacting this community, they don't like to or don't feel comfortable with traditional therapy or traditional treatment options such as medication. So that's why I wanted to look for additional ways the community could address these mental health needs, possibly through their pre-existing sources of social support, so they don't have to necessarily always go to a therapist to get the same kind of communication and social support they need for mental health needs.
Hello. Just a quick question.
Yes.
So the participants that you had, was there any way to find a correlation between how long they've been in school and their mental health as well?
So I didn't ask them how long they've been in school. All of them identified as having some college education, so that wasn't very specific. It is important, though, to note that they were all college students, so that as well could have influenced their ability to respond to these questions or how they perceive mental health and those type of things. So
It's just an observation, too. I feel like it would be like an interesting perspective to have, like, if you were to track African Americans that were coming into college as freshmen, and kind of perhaps doing, like, as they exit, how has their mental health changed? Given that there are resources here, but also there's some problematic things that do happen on campus universities as well. So
yeah, I agree.
So with them talking about like counseling and how that wasn't kind of like an ideal source of like dealing with mental health things and stuff like that, and then looking at what they did say about family and friends, just from your research and the perspective that you got, how do you think we can like enhance those supports that they did say were helpful since the like counseling? Really
Right. So I was thinking along the lines of possibly established mental health like resources or organizations could maybe do like a whole bunch of awareness spreading and information dissemination. I feel like that's the main thing to target their families and friends, so that way they can have these kind of like a first aid response to their mental health needs and that type of thing.